The night Elizabeth Voss was sent to ruin, she wore her sister's pearls, not her own. She had none left. Her mother had sold them 3 weeks prior to cover the first wave of debts Cecily's scandal had left behind. Quietly, without asking, the way the Voss family did most things to Elizabeth, without asking. The pearls were borrowed, the gown was altered, and the carriage was borrowed too, from a neighbour who pitied them enough not to say so aloud. Elizabeth sat in it alone, her gloved hands folded in her lap, watching the dark countryside blur past the window, and understood with the particular clarity of someone who has already grieved a thing that she was not being sent to the Hartwell ball as a guest. She was being sent as a message, a sacrifice dressed up in ivory silk and her sister's jewelry, dispatched to deliver an apology that was not hers to give, for a disgrace that was not hers to own. Cecily, of course, was at home. Cecily was always somewhere comfortable when the consequences arrived. The Hartwell estate blazed against the October sky like something from a fever dream, every window lit, the drive lined with torches that reflected gold against the wet cobblestones. Elizabeth descended from the carriage without assistance. The footman did not offer his hand. She noticed. She said nothing. She had become practiced at noticing things and saying nothing. It was, she had discovered, the primary skill required of a woman in her position being this: the second daughter of the Earl of Voss, the plain one, the sensible one, the one society had always looked past on its way to admiring Cecily. And now, in the wreckage of Cecily's very public, very catastrophic broken engagement to Lord Ashby's eldest son, Elizabeth had been handed a new position entirely. She was the family's apology. She was the face they sent when they were too ashamed to send their own. What no one had told her, what her mother had carefully omitted in the rushed, whispered instructions before the carriage departed, was that Lord Ashby's eldest son would not be the only one she needed to face tonight. The Duke of Mercer would be in attendance. The Duke of Mercer, whose younger brother had been quietly, devastatingly implicated in the same scandal, whose family name had been pulled into the wreckage not because of anything they had done, but because Cecily, cornered and desperate, had offered his brother's reputation as collateral to soften her own fall. Elizabeth had learned this an hour ago from a letter she was never meant to read, left open on her father's desk. A letter from the Duke's own father to hers, cold, formal and specific in its accusations, demanding acknowledgement of what the Voss family had allowed to happen to the Mercer name. She had not told her mother. She had not turned the carriage around. She had simply sat with the information the way she sat with most difficult things, quietly, in the dark, until she could breathe around it, and she had made a decision her mother had not authorized. She would not deliver the scripted 3 sentences her mother had pressed into her hand. She would do something considerably more dangerous. She would tell the truth. The ballroom swallowed her whole. 200 candles, 300 guests, the particular roar of aristocratic conversation that always sounded to Elizabeth like water rushing over stone. Heads turned as she was announced, not with interest, with something colder. The whispers reached her before she had taken 4 steps. The Voss girl, the other one. She kept her chin level. She kept walking. It was at the far end of the room, near the tall windows overlooking the garden, that she first saw him. She recognized the Duke of Mercer the way one recognized a coming storm, not from any single feature, but from the quality of stillness around him. He was watching the room with the composed, unhurried attention of a man who had no need to perform interest, because nothing escaped him regardless. And then, in a room full of people who were looking through her, his gaze found her. He did not look away. Elizabeth did not know what he saw. She did not yet know that it would change everything. She only knew, with a cold certainty she could not explain, that the night was about to become something she had not prepared for. She had approximately 4 minutes before someone decided to make an example of her. Elizabeth knew this the way she knew most social arithmetic, from years of watching rooms operate beneath their own surface, reading the geometry of who stood near whom, whose smile carried teeth, whose whispered comment landed like a stone dropped into still water. Lady Hartwell near the fireplace, pausing mid-conversation to track Elizabeth's progress across the floor. Lord Ashby's wife, positioned deliberately near the refreshment table, her fan moving with the particular slow rhythm of a woman preparing to say something unforgivable. The younger ladies clustered near the far wall, not whispering yet, waiting to see which way the current ran before committing to a direction. Elizabeth kept walking. She had a purpose. She found Edward Ashby near the card-room entrance, speaking to 2 men she didn't recognize. He was thinner than she remembered, with a careful blankness in his face that she understood immediately. The expression of someone who had learned to keep everything still, so nothing could be read. She waited at the edge of his periphery until courtesy required him to acknowledge her. He turned. Something moved through his eyes, quickly suppressed. "Miss Voss," he said, "Mr. Ashby." She did not soften her voice into performance. "I owe you an apology, not the one my mother wrote for me to deliver. I left that in the carriage. I mean one of my own. I am sorry you were treated with so little regard. You deserved better than what you were given." The two men with him went very still. Edward Ashby looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his careful blankness shifted, the smallest degree, like a door not fully opened but no longer entirely closed. "That is," he said slowly, "unexpectedly honest. I find honesty more useful than performance," Elizabeth said, "though I acknowledge I appear to be the only person in this room who currently believes that." She paused. "There is something else I need to say. About the Duke of Mercer's brother. About what my sister told people, and what the truth actually is." She told him. Quietly, precisely, with the two unnamed men standing witness whether she intended them to be or not. She told him that Cecily had fabricated the young man's involvement entirely, that his name had been offered up like a coin spent to buy Cecily's social escape, and that he had done nothing, except a convenient distraction. Edward's jaw tightened as she spoke. When she finished, he said, "Your family knows this." "Yes," Elizabeth said. "And they sent you here tonight without telling you to say it. They sent me here tonight to say as little as possible and cause as little additional damage as possible." She held his gaze. "I decided that was the wrong assignment." Edward was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with a weight she felt rather than heard, "Thank you, Miss Voss." She curtsied, turned, and walked directly into the worst moment of the evening. Lady Hartwell had moved. She was now positioned at the center of the room with 4 of her particular friends arranged around her like a court. And as Elizabeth turned, she found herself facing them with no reasonable exit available. The music had paused between sets. The room was attentive in that involuntary way rooms became attentive when something was about to happen. "Miss Voss." Lady Hartwell's voice carried the warm, crystalline quality of a woman who had spent decades learning how to be cruel beautifully. "How very brave of your family to send you. One assumes your sister was indisposed." The laughter was immediate and managed, the kind trained by years of society into something almost indistinguishable from polite amusement. "My sister sends her sincere regrets, my lady," Elizabeth said. "Does she?" Lady Hartwell tilted her head. "I confess I am uncertain what quality of regret one sends after dragging a respectable family's name through the London papers. But perhaps your family has a particular vocabulary for it that the rest of us lack." There it was. The room held its breath. Elizabeth opened her mouth, and then a voice arrived from slightly behind and to her left, unhurried, carrying the exact quality of authority that required no elevation of volume to fill a room entirely. "Lady Hartwell." The Duke of Mercer stepped into the circle with the ease of a man who moved through social spaces the way water moved through channels, finding the path of least resistance because all other paths simply yielded to him. He was taller than she had registered from across the room. His eyes, she noticed now, were dark and entirely steady. "I believe we were promised a Scotch reel before supper. I have been looking for a partner with sufficient composure to survive the first 3 figures without catastrophe." He turned to Elizabeth with the expression of someone completing a sentence he had already begun. "Miss Voss, I wonder if I might impose." The silence lasted exactly long enough to understand what had happened. Elizabeth Voss had just been publicly claimed as the Duke of Mercer's chosen partner for the next set. In front of Lady Hartwell, in front of everyone, she took his offered hand. "You may," she said. Her voice was steady. She was enormously grateful he was already turning, leading her away before Lady Hartwell had assembled a response. They reached the edge of the forming set before Elizabeth spoke. "You did not need to do that." "No," the Duke agreed simply. "It will cost you something. Most worthwhile things do." He positioned himself across from her as the music started. "You told Ashby the truth. About my brother. It was not a question." Elizabeth glanced at him. "You were close enough to hear. I was close enough the moment you walked in." A pause, brief but weighted. "I received my father's letter to yours this morning. I knew what your family had done, and I knew what they had sent you here to do. I came tonight expecting a performance." He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise but was its quieter cousin. "You were not what I expected, Miss Voss," the music began. The reel required their separation, carrying her down the line and back, and she had 12 beats to process that the Duke of Mercer had come tonight knowing the full shape of the thing. Knowing what Cecily had done to his family, knowing what Elizabeth had been sent to do, and had still crossed the room to stand beside her. She did not understand it entirely. She filed it alongside the other things she did not yet understand about this evening, which were accumulating rapidly. When the figure brought them back together, she said, "Your brother, is he well?" The Duke's jaw tightened very slightly. He is in the country. He finds London disagreeable at present. A pause. He is 23 years old and was named in a scandal he had no part in. I know, Elizabeth said. That is why I told Ashby. He looked at her directly then. Not the assessing glance he had offered the room all evening, but something more deliberate. You understood that telling Ashby publicly made your own position worse tonight. Not better. Your family will hear of it before morning. Yes, why then? Because he is 23 years old and didn't do anything, Elizabeth said. And I am very tired of watching damage be redirected toward people who don't deserve it. The reel ended. He returned her to the edge of the room, and then he did not leave. He stood beside her, and this Elizabeth understood was a different thing entirely from the dance. The dance could be dismissed as courtesy. This was a declaration, small, quiet, and absolutely legible to every person in the room who understood how these things worked. She did not ask him to leave. She was too tired, and he was too steady, and the evening had already cost her more than she had brought with her. The letter from her mother arrived the following morning before breakfast. 4 pages. The word Elizabeth underlined twice on the first. It declined in dignity steadily from there. She was to send the Duke a formal note of thanks and nothing further. She was to remember her position. She was to understand that a man of his standing did not pursue second daughters of scandal-touched earls for any reason that would reflect well on the second daughter, and that whatever impulse had led her to contradict her mother's careful instructions and expose the family's private knowledge to Edward Ashby in a room full of witnesses was to be suppressed immediately and permanently. Elizabeth read it once. She set it on the writing desk. She did not write the note her mother requested. She was not, she realized, afraid of her mother's anger anymore. She was not certain precisely when that had changed. But sitting in the thin morning light with the letter in front of her, she felt only a kind of exhausted clarity, the feeling of a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had simply finally put it down. The Duke called 4 days later. He asked to speak with her father. He was in the study for 50 minutes. He emerged with an expression that told Elizabeth nothing at all, which she was beginning to understand meant a great deal. Her father found her in the sitting room afterward, wearing the look of a man confronting something he had not prepared for. Mercer has asked permission to call on you, her father said, formally. Elizabeth set down her book. What did you tell him? Her father was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man doing arithmetic he did not like the outcome of. I told him I required time to consider it. He paused. He said he would return in 2 days. He did not appear to consider the matter negotiable. And is it? Elizabeth asked. Negotiable? Her father looked at her. And for the first time in a very long time he looked at her. Not through her, not past her towards Cecily, not with the mild, benevolent blankness he had perfected over years of treating her as the household's sensible furniture. He looked at her as though he was seeing the specific and particular person she actually was, and finding himself surprised by what was there. No, he said finally. I don't suppose it is. He gave his permission the following morning. The Duke called twice that week, and both times he found her in the room with the same unhurried certainty, and both times he said something that was not a compliment. Because he did not, she was. Learning, deal in compliments, but was instead a precise observation that treated her as someone whose mind was worth engaging directly. He asked her opinion on the Eastern trade negotiations and listened to her answer without the faint, polite surprise most men produced when a woman said something accurate. He told her about his estate in Shropshire with the matter-of-fact detail of someone who was not performing ownership, but actually thinking about a place he loved. He made her laugh once, unexpectedly, with a dry observation about Lady Hartwell's new portrait in the society pages, and she saw him register the laugh with a satisfaction he made no effort to conceal. It was, she was finding, considerably more unsettling than flattery. The opposition arrived, as she had known it would, in the form of the Duchess of Mercer. His mother was a woman who had managed the Mercer family's social position through 3 decades of political turbulence with the focused competence of a general, and who had no intention of watching her son attach himself to a family currently synonymous with public disgrace. She came not to the Voss house but to a tea hosted by a mutual acquaintance, engineered her proximity to Elizabeth with the practiced ease of long social experience, and delivered her assessment in the pleasant, unhurried tone of a woman accustomed to being obeyed. You are a sensible woman, Miss Voss, the Duchess said, pouring her own tea with the serenity of someone who had never needed to wait for anything. Sensible enough, I think, to understand that my son's attachment to your family's circumstances would not serve him, or you. The kindest thing you could do for both of you is to allow this to resolve quietly. Elizabeth looked at the Duchess of Mercer across the tea table. The older woman was formidable in the specific way of those who had wielded power so long they no longer remembered it as power. It had simply become the texture of their daily life. "With respect, Your Grace," Elizabeth said, "your son appears capable of determining what serves him." The Duchess's expression did not change. "Young women who rely on that argument frequently discover it has limits. And mothers who rely on their sons' obedience," Elizabeth said, with the careful evenness of a woman selecting each word, like a chess piece, sometimes discover the same. The silence that followed was the specific silence of two people who have each registered that the other is not going to yield. The Duchess set down her cup. Something in her face shifted, not softening exactly, but recalibrating. "You are not what I expected either," she said, and it was impossible to tell entirely whether this was a compliment or a warning. It turned out to be both. The thing Elizabeth had not anticipated was Cecily. She had anticipated her mother's opposition and her father's slow, guilty capitulation. She had anticipated society's scrutiny and the Duke's mother's resistance. What she had not fully accounted for was that Cecily, watching the trajectory of events from the comfortable distance of the family home, would recognize the threat. Not to Elizabeth, but to herself, and act accordingly. The new story began circulating 3 weeks after the Hartwell ball, moving through drawing rooms and morning calls, with the particular momentum of something that confirmed what people already half wanted to believe. The story was this: the Duke's brother, young William Mercer, had not been an innocent bystander in Cecily's broken engagement. He had, according to the new account, pursued Cecily with an inappropriate intensity that had made her position with Edward Ashby untenable. Cecily had broken the engagement to protect herself. She was a victim, not an architect. Elizabeth heard it from 3 separate sources in a single afternoon. By evening, she had traced it back to its origin with no difficulty at all, because Cecily had never been as subtle as she believed herself to be. She sat with it for one night of understanding exactly what her sister had done, and why, and what it would cost William Mercer if it took hold, and what it would cost her if she moved against it. In the morning, she put on her coat and walked to the one place she had not planned to go. The Duke was in his study when she was shown in. He rose immediately, reading her face with the unhurried attention he brought to everything. He did not ask what had happened, he simply waited. She told him all of it, the new story and its source, the full sequence of what had happened and what she believed her family had known from the beginning. She did not protect anyone in the telling. She had carried other people's comfort for a very long time. She was done with it. When she finished, the room was quiet. "You came here knowing this makes your own position worse," the Duke said. "Yes, your family will not forgive it." "No," she met his eyes. "They will not." He was still for a moment. Then he crossed to his desk, sat, and wrote 2 letters with the focused efficiency of a man who had already decided what needed to happen and was now simply executing it. He sealed both. He handed one to his footman with instructions she didn't hear. The other he held for a moment, then looked at her. "I am sending Edward Ashby a full written account of what my brother can confirm, which is considerable," he said. "Ashby has the standing and the motive to put this to rest publicly. He will do it." A pause. "William will be embarrassed, but he will be vindicated, which matters more." Elizabeth nodded. And then the Duke said, setting down the second letter, "I would like to speak to your father." "You have already spoken to my father. I would like to speak to him again." He looked at her, steadily, more definitively. Elizabeth held his gaze. The morning light came through the tall study windows and lay across the carpet between them. Outside, London carried on its ordinary noise, hooves on cobblestones, a vendor's distant call, the particular texture of a city that did not stop for private reckonings. "Your mother will not approve," she said. "My mother," the Duke said, "approved of very little that has ultimately proven worthwhile." Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but its near neighbor. "She also told me last week that you were not what she expected. From her, that is significant endorsement." Elizabeth looked at the man who had crossed a ballroom for no reason she had asked for, who had stood beside her when standing cost something, who had told her difficult truths without using them as weapons, and who was now sending letters on behalf of a brother he loved, and looking at her like she was the fixed point in the room. "It is not entirely impossible," she said. "In case you were wondering." He understood her immediately. "I was," he admitted, "wondering." Edward Ashby delivered the Mercer family's account to the people who needed to hear it within the week. He was, it turned out, a man who had spent 6 weeks with a great deal of contained fury and very little avenue to discharge it, and being given accurate information and clear permission to use it, proved an effective combination. The new story collapsed in the particular way badly constructed things collapsed, quickly, once the first weight-bearing element gave way, and with a completeness that left almost nothing standing. Cecily said nothing publicly. Privately, Elizabeth received one letter, 4 sentences in her sister's familiar handwriting. It contained no apology. It contained something possibly worse, a bewildered, genuine incomprehension that Elizabeth had chosen this. "You had everything arranged so well," Cecily had written, as though Elizabeth's entire life had been a service performed for the convenience of others, and its interruption was the only remarkable thing. Elizabeth folded the letter and put it away. Perhaps someday she would feel something complicated about it. Today she felt only clear. The wedding was held in December, which society considered either indecently rushed or boldly indifferent to their opinion, depending on who you asked. Elizabeth considered it neither. She considered it simply decided, in the way things were decided when 2 people stopped negotiating with their own caution long enough to see clearly. The Duke's mother sat in the front pew in dark burgundy silk, her posture immaculate, her expression composed. She had not withdrawn her opposition so much as she had, over the preceding weeks, quietly reclassified it. Elizabeth had observed this happen without drawing attention to it, the way she had observed most things. Noting the moment, the Duchess stopped arguing against her and began asking her questions instead. Real questions about the estate management in Shropshire and her views on the Corn Laws and what she intended to do with the East Garden, which had been, the Duchess noted with a sharpness that was almost fond, a disaster since 1809. It was not warmth, precisely. It was respect, which Elizabeth suspected would prove more durable. William Mercer sat beside his mother, 23 and visibly less guarded than he had been. His name had been returned to him, and he wore the relief of it quietly, the way young men wore things they were still learning, they were allowed to feel. He caught Elizabeth's eye as she passed and gave her the small, specific nod of a person acknowledging a debt they intend to honor. Cecily was not there. Their father had advised it, and for once Cecily had listened. Their mother sat 3 rows back and wept, though whether from joy or grief, or the particular complicated emotion of watching a daughter she had undervalued for 25 years step into a life that exceeded anything she had arranged for her, Elizabeth did not attempt to determine. She reached the altar. The Duke turned to look at her, and his expression was the one she had come to know best. Composed, steady, and underneath the steadiness, something private. Something that did not require a room to validate it. Something that had been decided in a study on a November morning over 2 sealed letters, and a question neither of them had asked quite directly. "You look," he said quietly, "like someone who has made up her mind." "I made up my mind," Elizabeth said, "in a carriage in October. I was simply waiting for events to catch up." The smile that crossed his face then was real and rare and entirely hers. She had spent years in rooms where no one looked at her and saw anything worth seeing. She knew now exactly what it felt like when someone did. And she knew with the same quiet certainty she had carried alone in so many carriages and sitting rooms and borrowed gowns, that she would not spend another year of her life being the sensible one, the useful one, the one who absorbed what others discarded and asked for nothing in return. She was Elizabeth Voss. She had delivered an apology that was not hers to give, to a room full of people waiting to watch her fail, and she had done it on her own terms. She had been the plain sister, the forgotten one, the family's convenient instrument, and she had walked out of that ballroom on the arm of a duke, not because she had been rescued, because she had been seen. And if this story found something in you, if you have ever been the sensible one, the useful one, the one the room looked past, then share it with someone who needs to hear that being seen is not luck. Sometimes it is simply a matter of refusing to look away first.